WCLN 1170 Radio and Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by JW Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We Should Know's on our way. We want to thank you for being with us today. We're coming to you from Star Communications, Channel 16, WCLN Radio simulcast on Tuesdays at 2:30 and also Thursday at 7 p.m. on Star Communications TV. We're talking with somebody that you know, you've probably seen, you may know very well, but certainly you know the name. It's Ed Causey, and he's the county manager for Sampson County. Ed, thank you for being with us today.
Good morning.
I want to start the conversation today with just a little intro for you. You've been with the county now as county manager for, we were kind of talking before we went on air, it's going to soon be like 13 years. You started in 2010 with the county, but I want to kind of reflect on your background with the USDA, in which you work with multiple counties in working financial assets and loans that's critical, particularly to rural areas. You have a master's degree in economics from North Carolina State, and I thought it was interesting also that you have an undergraduate degrees in animal science and poultry science. If there's been anyone that could describe a background and credentials of somebody that would be ideal for a county manager's job in a rural county, I think you do.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
And with that, I'd like to start today. Of course, as you know, we've talked about, we got 4 segments on this show. I'd like to at least focus in an opening today for you to help us to understand the budget process in Sampson County, because you actually have oversight and kind of as directed by the commissioners to look at process, go through that annual review of the budget in the county. And we're talking a multi-million-dollar budget here with, as best I can count, 20 plus, if not 28 plus departments. Talk to us about that. And this is the time of year you're already into it, I'm sure.
Yes. Realistically, the next year's budget starts just as soon as you finish last year's budget. We look at it from a variety of points of view. First of all, what did we do that we did well? What did we have to possibly leave out that we needed to cover, and what are the concerns that we've got going forward so that we can try to anticipate, and if the opportunities present themselves, to make some adjustment. I would tell you that with the chairman and co-chairman of the commissioners, starting in October, we probably have a conversation once a month about issues that are coming in. At this time of year, we're into early February. We are sending out notices to the departments and our other departments that we would like all of the departments that we work directly with to send us their budget, hopefully by the middle of March. We asked the school systems and other partners to have their information to us by the end of March. So that's just the first step of getting information. The finance officer and I will then spend the next 2 to 4 weeks looking at this information and trying to ask questions and ascertain what we needed. The interesting thing about this part of the game is we don't have the income, the revenue projections in total to be able to quantify it. So our budget is a 2-step process. We get the information in February and March. We look at it, we make our initial review, and we sort of think of what we hope we have and what we would like to do. And then again, as we get into 1st of April, we work closely with Jim Johnson to try to come up with the projections of what revenues are going to be. And then from that point on, for the next month, we probably have multiple discussions individually with the commissioners and departments about what we think we can and cannot do, with the goal that we want to have a projected budget ready by close to the middle of May, with a public hearing at the June Board of Commissioners, and then hopefully have a budget approval by the end of June. So my work, a lot of times people kid the county managers really don't do a lot. Well, I'm not going to argue that point, but I will tell you, if we do work, we spend a lot of time at it between the end of February and the end of June.
One of the things that's interests me in this whole budgetary process is that You work with 5 folks that are elected commissioners,
yes,
that represent districts throughout this county. And I'm going to try to focus on Sampson County. Different counties kind of look at it differently, but those folks are responsible for representing their constituencies in the communities. But your process is to try to mediate that, to carry out their direction for you, to make sure that all of these budgets not only are recognized and you go through it, but basically justify those budgets to the commissioner.
Yes. Our goal is to actually produce a budget that requires very few questions when we get there. That doesn't mean the commissioners have not had input. That means we have tried to listen, and to the extent that we can, we try to create that budget that we all have a comfort level with. And then, of course, when the budget and the citizens have a right to come in and make their comments in June, then we start our budget workshops and try to consider those comments and try to make the appropriate adjustments to the commissioners. I generally tell people the budget is my budget until it's presented to the commissioners, and then it's the commissioners' budget to decide how they want to deal with it thereafter.
How do you look at not only the budgets that are requested, and I'm sure folks know, department heads understand that there's certain things that are just not going to happen. There's just ludicrous, they can't order a Learjet and those kinds of things. But how do you justify knowing that each department, whether it's public health or social services or whatever, that are in critical needs, and you, if you had the ability to write a check, you do it yourself, but knowing that this county can't afford that?
Quite often that does occur, and fortunately we've got good department heads. So one thing as we talk about this, I'll throw in, we've just had our audit that came back and indicated we had no material weaknesses and no points of interest that was to be expressed. So to me, that is kind of a tribute to the quality work done by David Clack and his group, as well as all of the department heads. But one of the things we have to be careful about is we can talk to departments and says we can't do this and we can't do that in discussions. However, I've changed and have a little different view. I don't want the departments to overextend, but it's important that they document what they think their needs really are. And we try to separate needs from wants, because at the end of the day, if it is a true need, that department head needs to recommend it. And then we, as the advocate for the departments and also the advocate for the commissioners, we have to sort of evaluate those requests to see what the final recommendations are. I would tell you that good recommendations most of the time, I would say over a course of a 2 or 3 year period, we do a pretty good job of meeting the real needs of the departments. To tell you in any 1 year that everybody gets everything they want, no, they're not, because one of the things we will report is what the requested budget is and what the presented budget is going to be. And generally there is a pretty significant difference. And then with that presented budget, sometimes because of priorities and feedback from the public, the commissioners will make changes therein.
Do you get, and I recall some conversations we've had in the past, do you get input, and I remember, and I'm going to try to paraphrase something you said several years ago when you were sitting in that seat, is that if somebody has an idea of how you can fix something or make something better, that you're just more than happy to get that call. If it's to complain about something you can't fix, that may be a whole nother question.
Yes, somebody can give you the complaint. What is more helpful is when they can give you the fix that is reasonable, that is within your priority. Tell you one thing was interesting. When I was with USDA, I was on a team of people that there were 4 district directors selected from the United States. And we would go up quarterly to meet with the National Administrator of Rural Development. And we got to go in there and tell him what we thought the problems were in the organization. But we could not present any problem for which we did not have a reasonable solution. So if we were just going to talk in the abstract, he was not interested in that, nor was he interested in a problem for which we didn't have a solution. But if we could give him a problem and then tell him something that we thought was reasonable and practical for solving that problem, then he was all ears. And generally, most teams got put down once or twice before they understood the rules of engagement. And it turned out to be a very good learning experience for me to be in that process and understand what people need. It's like talking to the commissioners. When I share with them a problem, they generally want me to have a potential solution, not necessarily they're not going to decide something else. But if I'm going to give them the problem, I'm the paid administrator. Why not have a proposed solution for them?
Do you find that a lot of the problems that come before you that you have to address, I mean, it's what I hear you saying is when it hits your desk, it's not going anywhere else. That's where it's got to be fixed right there. Do you find that that's reasonable solutions that you can compromise on or maybe adjust, or especially this time of the year as you're looking at budget preparation in the fiscal year, July, which is just a few months, is that something that's easily done, or is it something that you look at and just totally befuddled?
You try to consider the list of things, and I can tell you there are things that have come up that people have talked to me about now that I can't promise that we're going to include it in the budget, but I can tell you something that we're going to consider and evaluate. For example, there's a beaver problem in this county. Because of budget considerations, we did dial back on what we were spending last year. This has come up. Now, I can't promise you what we're going to do with it, but I can promise you we're going to have discussions to see if there's additional funding that we can include for it. We have all kinds of technological issues. One of the things that I think that somebody could legitimately criticize us for is with the pandemic, I don't think we have put the emphasis on technology and some of those improvements that we need to make. So technology is coming back to the forefront. Is something that we at least need to evaluate and begin to plan how we might get there.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to talk a bit more about this whole allocation of resources and the adjustments oftentimes that needs to be made. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We're talking with Ed Causey, the county manager, that it would be, I guess, an understatement to say he has a very weighty job here in the county of making sure that everything balances and that you get the services that you need and oftentimes demand. We'll be back in a moment. Call a friend. Stay tuned.
You're out for an evening on the town. Finally a chance to relax and forget that you left your front door completely unlocked. Fortunately, you just installed a security system from Star Communications. With just your cell phone, you can check on your house, lock it down, light it up, and get back to relaxing.
He forgot to put Buster in his crate.
Unfortunately, we can't help with that. Security and automation from Star Communications. Call today to find out more.
Most aging adults want to stay in their homes as long as possible. And as your loved ones get older, you want to support them, even when you can't be there. Star is proud to offer Star Alert. This new system is now mobile and has GPS compatibility, so your loved ones can live their lives and you can have peace of mind, knowing they can get the help they need with just the simple push of a button. The new Star Alert also offers automatic fall detection, so help will be alerted even if they can't press the button. Call and ask about Star Alert today.
Welcome back, folks. Thank you for being with us today. We're here talking with Ed Causey, the county manager for Sampson County. Been involved in that position since 2010. Ed has experience in multiple areas, close to 40 years in working with finances throughout eastern North Carolina and rural counties on a federal level, particularly financial resources. Has been doing an exemplary job here in Sampson County. Ed, thank you for sitting down and talking to us today. I really liked the conversation we had about the budget and this 22-23 budget I was looking at, and I'm holding this up. But this particular budget, and you notice there's not many pages here. We're talking a 500-plus page document. Certainly, I don't have that in my lap. But the preparation of that budget and putting it forth was huge, not only for you, but for the commissioners and others putting that out. Let's talk a bit about not only allocation of resources, but talk about expectations. Folks in the county expect certain things. I'll start with something that has now become almost expected. And a lot of folks want it. Sometimes they're in a bad place, they can't get it. And that's water, public water. Clean water, constantly checked. A very aggressive department in Public Works looks after that. What should folks think about, and what level of expectation should they have? I know there's been some changes in whether you're just now getting clean water, problems that occur in the area. Is that a fluid situation where expectations changed based on what the demand is, based on the supply, based on whether a pipe's being cleaned out and your water might turn orange? Let's just talk about that as an example and then look at it throughout the system.
Well, first thing I'll tell you, I hate to kind of admit my age, but I was working with USDA Rural Development, which was the Farmers Home Administration back in the 1970s. And back at that time, in the late 60s and early 70s, was the beginning of when, at any significant rate, people were talking about having water in rural areas. And so from that time, the view was, if we can get it, that is a good thing. As times have changed and we've moved forward to 2023, most people in rural areas would like to have water available to them. And quite frankly, we operate the water system as an enterprise system, so it's sort of a deal that it's got to sort of pay as you go. The fortunate thing that we've had with us is we have gotten an influx of about $20 million plus in the last 2 or 3 years is going to help us expand the system. For example, I think we've got $12 million and about $300,000 to develop a water system down in the Ivanhoe area. And quite frankly, because of the density of the population, that is an area, if we weren't getting grant money for the infrastructure, would be virtually impossible to consider. And we've also gotten some other monies that will help us expand the system in some other areas. So when you look at it, people do have the expectation of having water, but at the same time, they need to recognize that the water system is a little bit different than other county programs, and it is an enterprise, and we've got to be able to pay for the improvements and the maintenance of the systems thereof. And hopefully the infusion of money that we will have over the next 2 or 3 years, we will still not meet 100% of the expectations of having water everywhere. But as time goes by, we're going to narrow that gap as much as we can of people that do not have the resources.
What I hear you saying is that the water system is kind of a pay-as-you-go thing, is that one thing balances another. So if the cost of actually setting up to supply a home or business with water has gone up, it's because it's adjusted based on the need of making sure that balances.
Right.
So it doesn't come out of a big chunk coming out of the general fund.
That is correct. And for example, one of the initiatives that we've done in recent years with the water system is we do have a pretty good supply of water. We're selling water to Johnson County. Well, people say, well, why would you do that? Well, if we can increase revenues and efficiencies, that gives us the productive capacity to be actually come in and serve more users. It gives us the ability to absorb more users into the system at a reasonable rate, and it's an economy of scale. If you're producing water and you've got the volume available that is treatable, then hopefully you can reduce costs that makes your efficiency, so you can provide more water to rural customers, which is what our ultimate objective is.
One of the things that strikes me in our conversation today is that oftentimes we look at government and we think, well, there's this endless amount of money. But in reality, from a business perspective, and you very much look at it, I think, from that perspective, that budget has got to balance. You can't, the county has to have a balanced budget, unlike the federal government, where we talked a little bit about off air, $31+ trillion, and we don't even have a budget. But you're required to have a budget and stay within the constraints of that budget.
Absolutely, and it's got to balance. For example, talk about last year, the challenges we have, and I will admit, because of the budgetary constraints that we had, I recommended a tax increase. And presented as such, the commissioners looked at it, who have the real pulse of the people, and decided they just did not think the people were prepared for that kind of increase. And so they said, let's parry it back because of going through the pandemic and all of the supply chain and inflation. population and see what we could do. And I think their judgment was correct in order to do that. But so when we start out, keep in mind, whether we're a Wake County or Sampson County, we still have the challenges with supply chain. We still have the salaries with demand on employee salaries. We still have the increased cost of utilities that we utilize. And sometimes we just don't have the growth in population to support it. For example, I think the census reflected we're 3,000 or 4,000 people less than what we had in the previous census, and that does have a budget. So last year, we were fortunate that there were some sales tax increase projections that helped us, but we did not have a great deal of increase in the property taxes, and so the budget in many respects was a little bit stagnant. So it created some challenges that we're working through. Some of those challenges still exist as we get into the next budget, but hopefully we're going to have a larger base that will be able to do that. And the commissioners have had discussions, particularly the chair and vice chair, and we're looking to see if there are other alternatives that could realistically be considered.
When you hear folks comment about, well, we deserve this or we deserve that, I also reflect on an area in county that changed over my experience, and we share some of those dates you were talking about. So I remember when we had folks, if it was an emergency situation, the ambulance from your funeral home may roll out there to pick you up to get you to the hospital. Now we've moved progressively to an area in which we've got paid paramedics in the county. That changed the kind of dynamics of the budget because the expectation of the public changed. What's the sustainability of those kinds of things that the public expects now that it's in place? And it's almost like you got this going, you and the commissioners and the county. How do we maintain those things when other services now are coming up, that whether it's water or whatever, that we need to look at? But yet, the thing that you talked about a while ago, the revenues are pretty much the same. You didn't raise those taxes.
It is a challenge. At the end of the day, regardless of what you do, somebody's got to establish priorities. If the priority is to add a service that you don't presently have, are you willing to undergo and pay the cost of that and seek revenue from wherever it is, whether it be sales tax or grants or fees, increased taxes? So there is an expectation. You could decide if you would provide a new service, do other services need to be pared back? Because at the end of the day, go back to what you said, the commissioners are required to produce a balanced budget. So they get to select the priorities, but at some point in time, we then have to evaluate what we are funding. My job is to give the best recommendation that I can and help them come up with the information that tells them that whatever they're proposing to do is balanced and we've got the revenue. But they do get to choose the priorities and what we move forward with.
The document, again, and it's online. Folks can go look at the budget. They can look at it line item for line item. I think it's one of the things that struck me is every time I talk to you, things are transparent. It's there. You can literally look at it, and you can, within your own home, within wherever you live in this county, you can say to yourself, well, I'm not sure that works for me. But you have to balance it not only in a sense of the financial balance, but there's this responsibility, I think, that you have to help folks understand what works for somebody that lives in one of the towns or cities might not be the same expectation of somebody that lives in the country somewhere, should I say in the woods where, I kind of like that, but that's an interesting comparative analysis. Does that come up in conversation as how do we supply this expectation?
It is an expectation, and there's always the pressure between the money you have and the expectations that are required from you. I'll tell you something else our commissioners have become very keen on in recent years is we have one time a year, and from now until June, to decide what the budget is going to be. And when you decide what the budget is going to be, you determine where your revenues are coming to pay for that. When we start getting significant budget requests after the June 30th that requires ongoing operational increases, our commissioners have a little bit of a difficult time doing that, because all of a sudden somebody may be expecting you to pay for something for which you have not established the revenue stream to pay for it. Well, you can do that one time for a capital expenditure, because sometimes those things are important and come up. If you're doing it as a recurring operating expenses, then you know going into your next budget, you've already got a deficit of more expenditures than you have money over what you had last year. So those are some of the things we look at. And I'm not telling you that things that are presented are not good and worthwhile, but somebody has got to make the value judgments of the importance versus the expectation of what you're going to do with the next budget.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about revenue streams and generations of revenue and where that comes from. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with Ed Causey, and we're talking about services in Sampson County. We're talking about your expectations, and the man is in the middle between the governance body, the commissioners, and you to try to make that happen. We'll be back in a moment. Stay tuned. Call a friend.
To get the most out of your electronic devices, you need a strong internet connection and a protected home Wi-Fi network. You need high-speed internet from Star. Star has the fastest, most affordable high-speed internet service available for all your devices. We have no long-term contracts or high-pressure sales. Our service speaks for itself, and switching is hassle-free. We take care of everything with free installation from a local company. High-speed internet from Star. Internet at the speed of light.
Bill?
What bill?
The Star Communications bill.
No worries, honey. With Star's paperless billing and automatic draft system, I get a notification sent right to my phone. There's no need to be bothered with those paper statements, and our bill is paid on time every month.
Well, that's easy and convenient.
It sure is, honey.
Honey?
Yes, dear.
The bake.
Oh, right.
Welcome back, folks. We're talking with Ed Causey, County Manager here in Sampson County. We're talking about issues that you face every day, and that's not, what the supply chain is at the grocery store, but what your services are and what expectations of services are here in the county. And Ed, you're in the middle of that process. I think we kind of established your place between the governance body, i.e. the commissioners, and all of those departments out there that are looking at you and saying we need more here, we need more there, and then what the expectation of the general population, those folks that are listening today that are out there and they may expect something. Let's talk about where that money does come from. From a business perspective, there's certain business dynamics that have to be at play to have a balanced budget. You have to understand the revenue and you have to understand the expenditure. Between that, there's a lot of things that's going on. So we understand what we refer to as ad valorem tax, which is property tax. It's easy enough for the governor's body to say we're going to increase that 3 cents, 4 cents, or what have you. But is there other ways that we generate revenue that we hadn't talked about?
I think probably we've hit and miss over time in a variety of ways. But basically, the revenue that the county gets, we've got the ad valorem tax, we've got sales tax, we've got a number of programs that have grant money that comes up with them, and then we got fees that we charge for a variety of services. I do see the trend nationally, statewide, and even with what we're hearing people give us feedback. Well, maybe our adjustment needs to be on the fees that we charge for some of the services that we provide. And I know when you talk to other counties, there's a wide variety of things that people are trying to consider because people are then paying for specific service. Those are some things we're beginning to evaluate and look to see what adjustments we may need to make.
Those services that we talk about become critical to some degree, and in some of the specific areas that you look at is when you're looking at these departments, again, whether it's public health or whether it's response of emergency vehicles or whatever, they become critical because they are life and death situations and they require a momentary response. I've had the fire chief on in the city of Clinton, and I've had the fire chief on, one of the fire chiefs from the rural departments in the county. Talk about this sense. I'm going to put this out there as a question. Are we very fortunate to have these volunteers that are out there that are willing to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and fight fire, but yet they're not charging the county anything?
Absolutely. Without them, it would be hard to imagine what it would cost us to duplicate the service that they are providing. At the same time, and what people sometimes forget is sometimes we have questions in working with the fire departments. The county does have a fiduciary responsibility in the oversight of that money to make sure that it's accountable. Now, are we trying to tell anybody specifically what they're supposed to do? But no, we are trying to manage the oversight and the things that we have to do. And yes, many of our fire departments have a constant struggle trying to provide their services. In many of them, the pressure they're under right now are recognizing that so many of their firemen are working outside of the area during the day, that they're also having to consider, can they afford to pay people to come in and provide that service till the firemen get home in the afternoons and are able to provide it.
When we look at revenue streams, and you mentioned the sales tax piece, is that something the commissioners can do, or is that something that requires state policy movement as well? The commissioners have a responsibility if the state authorizes. Legislation has to empower us in order to levy a sales tax, and then after they do that, the commissioners can come in and decide and vote and evaluate as to whether we're going to implement the additional sales tax. But it's not something they can routinely just decide they want to do and go out and do it. You've got to get legislation that allows it. Ed, you spent a lot of your career looking at analytics and understanding it not just from Sampson County but other rural counties in the area. When you look at the sales tax versus property tax, there's a lot of folks say that the property tax itself is unfair because it targets folks that own stuff, whether it's land, whether it's tractors. And when we say tractors in today's world, and majority of the equipment now is 100,000 up, some of it even $500,000 stuff that's out there. It's high technology stuff. Is it an unfair tap on agriculture, this whole property tax thing? Did they pay more than really what anybody can anticipate compared to the person that says, for example, a government worker's got a fairly nice house, but he's got to pay ad valorem tax on his home. I get a kind of a different view because farmers really get hit with a huge tax bill. Some of them $30,000, $40,000 a year just in property tax.
Those tax bills can be high because of the assets they have. But keep in mind, the legislatures and the present use value, where farmers get a discount to some extent on the farmland, does not affect necessarily the buildings and tractors, as you say, but there is on some of the cropland values.
Well, and to that point, Jim Johnson, of course, if folks don't know, Jim Johnson is a tax collector here in the county. And I've had Jim on, and I hope to have him back. But in collecting those taxes, looking at different aspects of where that property comes from, I've noticed there's been more of a granular look over the past few years at that. Is that a way of trying to make sure that here's some more money that could be paid to the county that the county could use for some of these services? What is that particular look at? Because I know there are a lot of folks are pushing back. Wait a minute, why do they need to know I've got a rusty disc in the edge of the woods and that kind of thing?
Well, it is the same thing. If you're a residential homeowner, you pay taxes on your home, vehicles, and those things. Businesses do the same thing. The whole idea behind some of the reviews that we do is to try to create as much, not the same thing, but to create as much equivalency as we can. You were going back to your question on is the ad valorem taxes fair to everybody versus sales tax. I would suggest to you that there probably ought to be some combination thereof. For example, people paying sales tax, you have a lot of people that have lower incomes, so they could then argue that if you just did sales tax, they're paying a disproportionate part. So I would tell you the evaluation needs to be is evaluating all of the available structures that you have to create as much equivalency as you can.
So and I see your point on that, is that there is this sense, depending on where you are and what your perspective is from what you see.
Right. Yes, sir. Absolutely. All of us.
So when we think about that, are there future possibilities, for example, water, that folks have is kind of hopefully balances. But that may fluctuate based on the water system, based on the demand for making sure that that water is quality, that that price of water may go up per 500 gallons or whatever.
Yes, that is a constant thing. I would think, keep in mind, the water system is an enterprise fund, so we generally do not commingle. Does not mean that the county could not advance the water system money if it needed to, but I think the intent is to maintain a rate structure and management within that system where that is not necessary. And I think it's been a minimal amount of money that is being infused, and I think most of that occurred in the early days when the systems were being developed and being brought online to start with.
I want to touch on something since we're talking about revenue generation and expectation here. I get a lot of conversation, and folks will ask me, well, why don't you have somebody to talk about roads in the county? I want to kind of help us to be very clear on what the county's role is in maintenance of rural roads in the county, and majority of it is, I understand, state. Is there a piece of that the county has some access or leverage on?
I don't think there's any direct access or leverage. We have no specific responsibility for the maintenance or care of roads in the county. However, our group of county commissioners do serve as advocates. They can advocate to the DOT and others the needs of the county. We have a very good relationship with DOT. Keith Jackson was at our meeting Monday night sharing some of the concerns that they have relative to their budgetary constraints, and our commissioners took the opportunity to tell him some of the key needs that they thought. And Keith is very good about listening to those and trying to respond to those concerns where he can.
And, of course, Keith Jackson is the county engineer here for folks with DOT, North Carolina Department of Transportation, that many of us know, and he does a great job. I want to kind of look at where we're going. We're actually coming up on our last segment here. And when we do that, I want to kind of give folks a little teaser here. I want you to talk about some of the things that the county has now become engaged in that hopefully in the coming years will be a huge increase in revenue generation from the county, for the county, and those places that sometimes we see as, wow, they just spent several $1 million, how are we going to get our money? Why did they do that? And help us understand kind of the vision of the commissioners that you're carrying out to generate revenue. So individuals, as you mentioned a while ago, that may be lower income, may be working 2 or 3 jobs and everything, I can't pay anymore. And what you're doing, maybe they don't see it firsthand, but actually may help take some of that weight off. So we're going to go to break, and when we come back, we'll touch on that. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for being with us today. We are talking with Ed Causey, the county manager, and I think we're covering some vital questions that oftentimes come up, and maybe some things that you look at and you have a good idea, and you think, well, I need to let somebody know. And one of Ed's comments he's made on this show several times, if you have a good idea how to fix something, he definitely wants to hear that. He definitely also understands a lot of the complaints out there and some of the concerns that you go through each and every day. But one of the things we're doing here today, and on this last segment as well, is trying to clarify the process of dealing with a budget that has strict demands of something called balance and how that impacts your life. So call a friend and stay tuned, and we'll be back in one moment to kind of get in a little more in depth in some of those kind of opportunities that the county is looking at to deal with the tax situation. We'll be back in a moment.
Just because something may work doesn't mean it's right for your business. Let Star Communications' knowledgeable consultants help you customize a hosted voice system that's right for you. Our dedicated experts work with you to understand your business needs and guide you at every step, from choosing and installing services to ongoing maintenance and support. Contact Star today.
Eastern North Carolina is a beautiful place where we gladly choose to call home, and we strive to provide the best communications services. Star is committed to improving communications to all our service areas. because we want to improve the communities where we not only work, but also live. Star Communications. We are neighbors serving neighbors.
If you run a business, you need sales. To get sales, you need customers. To get customers, you need exposure. Let our team of experts craft and produce the perfect video ad to reach your intended audience while making the most of your advertising dollars. Call 1-800-706-6538 or visit starcom.net to contact our Star Communications production team and get your business moving to the next level.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you for being with us today. We Should Know is on the air. I want to quickly remind you, you can reach us via email at weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. Post Office Box 1482, Clinton, North Carolina. We're coming to you Star Communications TV, Channel 16, simulcast on WCLN Radio. We're talking with Ed Causey today. Ed, County Manager, Sampson County. Pretty big deal here. One of the things that we've talked about is all this revenue stuff. How do we provide these services? There seems to be a philosophy of thinking, and I'll put that out there to begin this with, is that we can't just continue to look at generating revenue from the average citizen that lives in Sampson County, that there needs to be more of a business and industry approach. Recently, the county just bought 200 acres of property in a very prime spot in the Newton Grove area. Is that an example of what we're looking at? And explain the importance of that versus the potential of increasing property taxes for individuals' homes.
I can categorically tell you that the cost of government over time is going to increase. And then we stop and look. So recognizing we got to have the revenue streams and looking at past history, can we just depend on increasing property taxes for residential homeowners? I would think the answer is, from a long-term standpoint, we got to look. We're strategically located between Wilmington and the Raleigh Triad. So are we going to try to influence the development of Sampson County, or are we just going to react to what comes to us? I can tell you that if we want to grow the tax base, it's got to be through economic development. Now, and when we do this, for me to sit here and tell you we're going to develop any property next year, the year after, I cannot. But I can tell you, if we don't have the commitment for long-term investments and be prepared to take advantage of those, we're not going to do anything for the tax base. And think about it. If we want to have citizens who enjoy the good life here, not everybody can work on the farm. So we need to be able to provide those opportunities where people can not only reside in Sampson County, but they also have the opportunity to work here. If people want to argue and tell me on the short term we should not be doing that, I can't tell you that is not a valid argument. I can tell you, as I sit in my office and I'm working on this year's budget, I also have to be thinking about budgets 10 years down the road for whomever is going to be here, whether it be me or somebody else. And so those are considerations that have to be made. And yes, there's very legitimate arguments in multiple areas as to what the real outcome ought to be.
So when we look at property that the county has purchased as far as industrial development, the idea is that property is not only in a prime location as far as I-40 and very close to the nexus of I-40 and 95, but it would be to bring industry in that could not only employ people but actually make a huge increase in the tax base.
I would tell you that's exactly correct. If we're not careful, Sampson County could become just a bedroom community for the Raleigh area in Wilmington, which means you could live fairly close to the interstates. In 45 minutes, you can be very close to either location. When we look at the tax base, residential homes are very important to us. But at the same time, when most young families have children, and so when he comes in, there are some tax consequences as far as outgoes from the county standpoint as to what that would cost. So we have to weigh all of that and look at the net revenues that can be generated for the benefit of the county for a long time.
Well, I know we got Stephen Barrington's doing a great job as economic developer here in the county, but one of the things that I was asked a while back, why don't you explore, is how do we get industry like some of the semiconductor industries and battery industries that are opened up around the Carborough area, which is a huge rural expanse, but we're talking if not $1 billion, $1 million industries. Is that something that is reasonable for Sampson County and something that the commissioners is looking at that may even be possible? Because you just talked about the importance of proximity, and certainly that property in the Newton Grove area is a very strategic location.
I think Sampson County is strategically located for good things to happen, whether that be next year, 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years. Good things are going to happen. At the same time that you're doing that, we've made a wonderful investment in some of the properties, but then we've got to make sure that these properties have all of the needed infrastructure that they need to support the industries that are going to come in. And that's a process that's going to take a good long time to also perfect. But if you don't work on it now, you've got no chance of dealing with it when those future opportunities come.
And although we do have folks that are very talented and background in economic development, those kinds of things, what do you see sometimes that you would like folks to know what their role is in economic development as an average citizen, as maybe the person that's retired, or maybe the person that's in their 30s or 40s? Do they have a role here in economic development as well?
I would tell you, if people see the need and people advocate, it cannot be anything but a positive. On the other hand, I guess if people have a disagreement, it's not inappropriate to express those concerns too. But I will tell you that the public opinion does influence a lot of things that go on, and the more people you have interested in a particular course of action, the more likely you're going to at least get some discussion about it.
One of the things I want to kind of segue into, and maybe hopefully we'll have enough time to kind of touch on this a bit, I want to segue into that whole idea of what is the landscape going to look like. And you mentioned 10 years, 5 years, 20 years from now. And again, we might not be sitting here having this conversation to talk about it, but what does that look like when we think about one of the big issues across the board in rural North Carolina, and particularly with the Rural Center, with the County Commissioners Association? One of the things when you look at advocacy, you see that thing of education. Not only access to education, but in some of our rural areas, it comes down to facilities and the need for new facilities. And you and I have talked about this previously. We've got school systems in the county, 4 high schools, one of the last high schools to have any kind of rebuilding or anything done is the Hopton district. A lot of folks in that district talk about, we really need a school up here. I know several years ago you and I discussed this, and at the time that might have been $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. That same facility now could be
$75 million.
$75 million. So how do we look at, and what advocacy do folks that see the need for that, and including I think the commissioners and you as well, but what advocacy part do we all play in trying to make that happen, and who do we look at other than ourselves to make that happen? Because it's not viable now, as you pointed out, to consider that for the sustainability of a balanced budget.
When you're looking at that versus any number of major projects, you've got to separate it. You've got the moral argument, and then you've got the financial argument. If I look at the moral argument, I would tell you I was with USDA when several of the new high schools were built, and Hopton was in that list, but was not developed at that time. So for me to sit here and tell you that people do not have a good, valid moral argument, that would be disingenuous on my part. Mm-hmm. At the same time, my role as a county manager, if the commissioners are consulting me, I've got to look at it from a financial standpoint. I basically can do anything they want to do if we got the wherewithal to pay for it, or the willingness to put in place the structure that pays for it. That's where we get into to the financial aspects of it. So then, realistically, can we build a $75 million high school without an infusion of funds from some sort of state or federal source? I would tell you, under current circumstances, that would be very challenging to overcome. But at the end of the day, if there is the commitment to anything and willing to pay in taxes or sales tax or whatever the fees would be, we can accomplish a lot of things.
I think one of the things that strikes me in our conversation today is the way you do this job is that, and I like your comment, is that we can make a lot of things happen if we do it collectively and unified together. But we can't do it with false expectations or unrealistic expectations. And I want to kind of just give you about a minute here for any last minute thing we need to cover, because unfortunately we're going to have to close today.
I would tell you that, yes, this year is going to be a particularly challenging budget. And it goes back to exactly what we have talked about the entire, in all three of the previous segments, is the fact we've got to measure financial capability versus the priority of needs. And once we shake those out, we will come up with a budget that is balanced. Now, does that necessarily mean we're going to meet all the needs that everybody wants us to? No, it does not. But it does mean that I think there will be some very good and honest and thorough discussions as what those objectives will be, and then try to accomplish what we can.
And I think folks, for the most part, Ed, in the county, of course, they know you, and I'm sure they know the commissioners. They know their school board members. If they don't and they see an issue, it's not unheard of to reach out to some of those folks and say, look, this is something I've been thinking about. I mean, that's kind of part of the process. And unfortunately, sometimes we get lost in the conversation and we forget that we've got a process in place.
I would tell you that if somebody's got a particular interest, now is the time to express it. We're interested any time of year, but we literally are focused on developing budgets. And so if there are priority needs by anybody that anybody wants to bring to our attention, yes, they can send them in. I can't promise you what level of attention they will receive, but every email that is received is read and reviewed and shared as appropriate.
This has been this for me, and I'm hoping for our viewers and listeners. It's been a very eye-opening discussion. Some of the things I think we talked about, there's a lot of folks that are aware of it, but just the depth and weight of carrying what you carry and trying to make these things happen. I guess in a sense of civility is very important in today's world. So I want to thank you for being with us today and being part of this conversation. And maybe we'll get some of those, what I call dual kind of decisions or thoughts out there from folks that we hadn't thought about that'll help us kind of open another door. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. We've been talking with Ed Causey. We look forward to seeing you again next week right here on We Should Know with another show that hopefully will bring you maybe some inspiration or some kind of new ideas about what your part is. And we look forward to seeing you again next week, and may God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host JW Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.